Okay. Good morning. It is somewhere around 9 o'clock in the AM on Thursday, my favorite day of the week. What are we? We are on the 16th of May, 2024, in the lunar cycle Opistishkitsatos, the flower moon. And I'm just walking around downtown Lethbridge. This place burned down this last year. Used to be a apothecary. Is that what you call it? Old time Chinese pharmacy, herb store and all of that. Yeah, I just dropped off my roommate Sheena's car for a tire rotation, and I'm gonna do an oil change on it later today, I think. But walking back to the house now. Got a few things to do today. Got a lawn mowing job. Take what I can get, and we'll see if we get snakes. I've been having snake calls and stuff, but since I got a long walk home, I figured this morning maybe I'd start another Memoirs video. Which memories should I describe? I kind of want to continue on the linear story of, what happened once we moved to Oregon. But then I also wouldn't mind doing another thematic one, like Ryan and the Reptiles, for instance. Let me think for a minute, which one do I really want to do? Yeah, let's do Ryan and the Reptiles. That one feels to me like it would be a little bit more fun than the linear telling of the early Oregon days. But we'll start there, because when we first moved to Oregon, I was like 5 years old. My dad got an electrician's job up in Salem and was buying a house. They were making a house. I think my parents bought their house for $35,000, something like that, real crazy compared to today's prices. And but while we were first living there, when they were still building the house, we were staying in this apartment complex. Remember I talked about the friend that I had with the Jesus picture in his window? That same friend and I were playing in the field. I used to have maybe 4 or 5 buddies in the apartment complex, and there was an adjacent field, just like a big vacant lot area, and we used to play out there, and there were garter snakes out there. So I started getting experiences like catching and holding garter snakes, and I know my mom has a photograph somewhere of me at that apartment complex holding a garter snake. But my earliest actual locked in memory of really, it's one of my earliest memories at all, but it involves snakes, and it was me and my friend, the Jesus friend, and we were out in that field, and we were messing around in the tall grass. We were fucking, I don't know what the heck we were doing, but we were sitting down in the tall grass, like the grass was over our heads, I remember. And then all of a sudden, to the side of us, I seen 2 snakes. We both seen them, freaked us out. We seen 2 snakes, and they looked like that. What is it called? Is it caduceus, or what is that symbol, the medical symbol with the 2 snakes that are entwined? I don't know if they were wrestling. I've never seen garter snakes since do that. I've seen other snakes, rattlesnakes, bull snakes, males wrestling in that fashion of that caduceus or whatever the heck it's called. But I've never seen garter snakes do that again, and I don't even know if they were garter snakes. I just know there were suddenly 2 snakes beside us doing that, and it was just seemed wild. And I think we got out of there. I don't remember ever being scared, but I remember being like, what the heck is going on, you know? And I've had a few encounters with snakes where I've, even in my adulthood, where I've had to be like, what the heck is this? But yeah, it's one of my very first childhood memories is the snakes doing that, hey? And right beside me as I'm sitting there in this tall grass. But yeah, I used to catch snakes, and then once we got the house built, behind the house was also like big, like the house came with an acre of land behind it, and then everybody's house on that street, you know, came with that acre of land behind it, hey? So we all had big garden plots, and so that was part of what my parents were into. We had grown most of our own food in my early childhood, and we did it right there in that back field. But before everybody got their gardens up and stuff, when the neighborhood was just being built, back there is just like grassland, you know, lot kind of a thing, and there were tons of snakes back there. So you know, we used to look for the like boards and stuff that were laying out in the grass, and you flip those boards and there would be snakes and stuff. Me and my brother used to go collect them, and by the time I was 8 years old, somehow I got it in my head that I wanted to buy a boa constrictor. And my memory of it is that I seen boa constrictors in the shopping mall. Lancaster Mall used to have the Pied Piper pet store, and they had some baby boa constrictors there. $50 was what they cost, and I remember asking my mom if I could buy one. Now, I thought at the time, and most of my life, I've thought that I'm the one that came up with that idea of proposing to buy a boa constrictor. However, just in the last few years somewhere, I think my Aunt Carol let it slip that my Uncle George, the guy who passed away, the kid who passed away on the motorcycle, my dad's brother George, I guess he had a pet boa constrictor. And so now I really suspect that, like many other things in my life, my dad slipped that idea into my mind. And I proposed it like it was mine, you know. And but I kind of think he might have slipped it in there now. I don't know. Any case, my mom doesn't like snakes, terrified of snakes. And I think she probably would have just vetoed the idea. And again, I suspect my dad's intervention there, because instead of vetoing, she gave me a loophole to get my snake. What she said was, $50 is a lot of money. How about if you raise half of that money, I'll give you the other half. If you raise $25, I'll match it, and you can buy a snake. And so this was, what, 1980, exactly, right? Like, right on the nose, 1980. And in 1980, kids didn't raise $25 on their own when they're 8 years old in the suburbs of Oregon. You know, like, you could get a lot for $1 as a kid back then. You could get pop and candy and stuff, you know, for under $1. And so, you know, at most, like, our parents would give us, you know, somewhere like $3 to $5 or something like that. You know, that's about the most money I'd ever seen, you know, or I'd ever had for myself at any one time. The idea of raising $25 was kind of intimidating, but I set to it. I went door to door down the street, asking people if I could weed their flower beds and stuff. Get the dandelions out and charge them $1 or something. And, I did a bunch of those. Before I knew it, I had $25, and my mom had to stick with her deal. So, and she did more than stick with her deal, because of course that's just the cost of the snake. They also had to buy me a tank, freaking heat pads, and all that kind of stuff. Hey, heat rock. I think we used a hot rock. Yeah, I know we used a hot rock. But anyway, I bought this snake. It was a female boa constrictor, and what did I name her? Pinky Tuscadero from Happy Days. I've named her Pinky Tuscadero. Took her home, and I think it might even been the first night I had her. I tried to give her a bath in my bathroom sink, and I either had the temperature way too cold or way too hot or something, because as I was giving her a bath, she suddenly went into like death rolls, and she kept going until she died. So I had done something wrong to her. I don't know what it was, but it broke my heart. I felt totally defeated. I'd lost my $50 snake that I worked so hard for, and I lost her like right away. And it was just terrible, So I cried a lot over that, and then my mom felt bad, so she took me to this other pet store, not the one in the mall, because maybe the one in the mall doesn't sell healthy snakes. I don't know. So she took me to this other pet store, and they had a young boa constrictor, basically a baby boa, first-year boa, and they couldn't keep it in an enclosure. It kept escaping. It would escape, and it would go sit on top of the bird cages. And so I bought that boa. It was a male boa constrictor, and I stuck with the Happy Days names. I called him Chachi, and Chachi became my pet from age 8 to 18. He was my major pet, and a big source of weird attention, of course, because not every kid in Jesus land in the Willamette Valley, Oregon, had a boa constrictor. Yeah, I bought a boa, and so I started living with a snake, basically in my bedroom, and giving my mom nightmares and stuff. But it got me a lot of attention right away. Like, I think the neighborhood kids and all of this, and then eventually I brought my snake to school. I know. So one of my good friends at the time, kid I'd been friends with for like since first grade or something, and we were going probably third grade then, Stevie Lanning, who you'll hear some other crazy stories about, but Stevie decided he needed a snake too. And his parents were weird. His parents were like pretty badly alcoholic, and I don't even know what they did to make a living, but they're kind of messed up folks. Any case, they bought Stevie not one snake but 2 snakes. They got a corn snake, and they got a reticulated python. Now, if you know snakes, you'll know these are 2 snakes that are not predisposed at all to being good at being handled and that kind of thing. Morning. And they're not predisposed to being handled at all, right? So he got himself a couple of real ornery snakes, and we used to have snake dates. I'd bring my boa, he'd bring his python, and we'd let them crawl around on one of our lawns or the other. I know Stevie also had a goose called Anker in his backyard. But yeah, we had our snakes. We had fun. I don't know what ultimately happened with Stevie's snake. I know there was one day when they tried to take the snake somewhere in a vehicle, Stevie and his mom, and the snake got in up under the dashboard and was just wrapping around everything in there. And his mom was like wasted, drunk like usual. And I think my dad had to go, painstakingly extract that snake from, in the up under the dashboard of the car. Eventually, I think Stevie's parents got rid of the snakes, because I know, like, by the time we were hitting, grade 6 or whatever, I had snakes, but Stevie no longer had them. And I don't know exactly can't remember exactly how he got rid of them. But I didn't stop at the boa constrictor. Well, the boas, having the boa, my parents were pretty thrifty, and they were into growing their own food, like I said. And, I wore like lots of homemade clothes usually and stuff. And so it's just natural that if I'm going to have a pet like a boa constrictor that eats rats and such, I might as well just start raising rats at the house, right? So my dad started investing in some tanks, and we basically built a rat colony in the garage to feed my snake, and we were taking a lot of the rats. I think my dad was taking them, selling them to the pet stores, so they'd have food for other people with snakes. But yeah, I think we had 5 or 6 tanks in the garage at one time, all of them, supporting the rat colony that we had in there. And I had one rat that was my favorite rat, that was Mickey Rat. He lived, several years and then died. And my dad and I did an autopsy on him and found that he had lung cancer, probably from being in the tanks. And when they get stinky and stuff, I figured we weren't cleaning them as much as they should be cleaned, I don't think. And Mickey just breathed enough of that, eventually gave him lung cancer. But yeah, I had the rats going in the garage. And then my dad somewhere picked up a big, like, he ultimately built Chachi a real big enclosure with wood and plexiglass and stuff, like maybe a 4 or 5 foot long tank, a few feet high, that was in my bedroom. But he also bought like a 50-gallon tank at one point, and I started keeping that as kind of a terrarium, and I put garter snakes in there and other creepy crawlies I could find around. But for reptiles wise, it was garter snakes. And eventually a couple of my garter snakes in there had babies. Got pregnant and had babies, which was cool. And so we got to learn a lot about garter snakes, at least the garter snakes in the Pacific Northwest, and what they eat and all of that. Oh, we're getting a phone call. I'll just have to call them back. And I remember other reptiles when I was a kid too. Like, I had the garter snakes, I had my boa constrictor, but my mom's parents eventually left California and moved to Phoenix, Arizona. And I remember taking trips to Phoenix. I might have been 10 years old, 12 years old, 13 and stuff. We had some different trips where we went to Phoenix on an airplane. And this was like, of course, pre 9/11. So the security was not what it is today at all. And I remember going to Phoenix and coming back on the airplane, and I had my pockets loaded with lizards and snakes and stuff that I'd picked up over there. I just smuggled them home and had them live in Oregon as long as they could. My brother at one point, I know, bought a gecko. We had anoles, those like U.S. chameleons. We had a tank with a bunch of anoles. My brother had a gecko that escaped. I think it's a wolf gecko that escaped its enclosure, and then it had babies in our house, and so we would see, these geckos running around on the walls now and then. So, growing up, and then I always had reptiles around me, and by the time I was, I think 15, 16, my parents were sending me away in the summers to be with the field station for the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, and eventually my last summer before I went to the military, I think the summer between my junior and senior year of high school, I got employed out there, and one of my jobs was to handle, the rattlesnakes if they came into the encampment area. Basically it was a field station for the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry. It was a science field station, and we would have different groups from the universities and colleges in Oregon come through, and then high school groups and that kind of thing come through for different programs. The university groups is usually like geology students and stuff like that. The high school groups, we do different things, like I went on a tour with them, a 6-week tour around the Anasazi sites of the Southwest, and we just camped the whole way and that kind of thing. At the field station, the high school groups that we got, we did some mountaineering programs where we'd train for a little bit in backcountry stuff, and then actually take them to climb mountains and stuff, and do some backcountry camping and that kind of thing. And but we had, we did survival camps, but we had a big, the field station itself with cabins and stuff like this, and we would get rattlesnakes come in to the compound, and it would be my job to pick up the rattlesnakes, either just move them out of the compound, or the first one of the season we always we had an enclosure there, just so that the different groups that came by and stuff, we could for sure show them a rattlesnake. We'd have one on hand, and so I used to take that one out too and do handling of it. So I was handling rattlesnakes when I was 17, and I was doing it freehand, like grabbing them by the back of the head kind of thing, which was way stupid. But that's what was up. Then I went to the military, and Chachi got sold Chachi to a policewoman, and by that time he was a big snake. When I got him, he was like not much more than a pencil, fat pencil. And by the time I was leaving for the army, Chachi, if I wore Chachi around my neck, his head would hit the floor on one side and his tail would hit the floor on the other. He's getting to be a big snake. But he got sold to a policewoman. I went in the military, and for a while, didn't have much to do with reptiles. The basic training that I went to was in Fort Dix, New Jersey, and the closest thing to any reptile-y stuff that I had there going on was a day that we were out. I can't remember it might have been at a shooting range or something, but there was a whole bunch of these tiny little frogs that had just probably grown up from tadpoles and just became frogs. There's hundreds of them around, and just on bets for a little bit of money, guys had pitched me a couple of bucks if I'd eat one live, and so I used to swallow those frogs just on a dare. But no real reptile stuff. Then I went to Goodfellow Air Force Base in Texas, And even though certainly, you know, in San Angelo, Texas, you could get into some reptile stuff, but I didn't do a lot in Texas. I didn't explore the nature outside of the base like I would at my next station. Like the Goodfellow Air Force Base, I was just doing my intelligence training with all the different branches of the military, and then I got sent to actually work live missions out of Fort Polk, Louisiana, and then I got into reptiles again over there because we were in the swamps of Louisiana. There were alligators. You know, I remember one of the master sergeants, he was close to retire, and they had sent him from the Presidio where he'd been teaching, I think, Russian, and they sent him to us because we were spying on the Soviet Union. Like I was in charge of intel, doing signals intelligence analysis for the Third Shock Army of the Soviet Union in the Ukraine at the time, and this was 1990, probably 1991, maybe and going into 1992, and the Soviet Union was breaking up at the time. And there was a lot of suicides that I would see, you know, on that intel and stuff. And that's, you know, the biggest thing that was going on was all of the Russian soldiers suiciding themselves. But in any case, like this little intel TK, this little tactical analysis site, was hidden in the swamp, you know? Like this is the same place where they flew George Bush at when 9/11 happened. They flew him right to this base at Fort Polk that or this base in Louisiana, Fort Polk that I'm talking about, and hid him out in the intel community there. So hidden in the swamp as we were, there was a lot of different reptiles. And yeah, one of the master sergeants that had been just getting ready to retire, he had a boat. He would take me down to the Gulf of Mexico, and as we're going down there, we go fishing. As we're going down there, we would pass through these bayous and stuff, and I'd see like Cajun guys out there on inner tubes shrimping with shrimp nets, and you know, right beside them there'll be alligators just kind of floating around on the top of the water like it's nothing, you know. There was one snake, a cottonmouth, a water moccasin, at Fort Polk. Like I used to walk with my buddies kind of along the railroad tracks out of the base and into Leesville, the adjacent town, and there's a part of that walk where we passed by a little stream, and always passing by that little stream, almost always, at this one point in the path, there would be a big water moccasin just laid straight across the path, and several times I had walked over him, just stepped right over him before I even realized he was there. And could have definitely got zapped now and then. Another time, I think it was probably that same snake because it was around that same area. My friend said he saw something with a red head, and we thought it must be some kind of weird lizard or something. He seen it draw its head back into the bush, this bush, and so we started parting the bush to look in there, and the next thing, this giant water moccasin just comes spilling out. Again, could have been creepy. Oh, I did see something in Texas. Let's rewind there. So when I was at Goodfellow Air Force Base, I had this girlfriend. She reminded me later, you know, of Britney Spears. She looked like that, hey? And she was going to school in San Angelo, medical school. And So she had been going out with one of my friends. My friend cheated on her, and then he got moved to be stationed in Colorado, and then she kind of fell into a relationship with me for a little bit. And one time I went down, I think I'd already been sent to Louisiana, but on leave I came back to see her into Texas, and I came to her in Central Texas, her little town where she grew up. It's just small, and we were walking down the street, me and her, in her little town, and we crossed over this bridge, over this stream, and looking down into the stream, there were dozens of water moccasins, and it was like they were having some kind of race or something. Most of their body was out of the water, and they were just shooting back and forth down the stream together. Dozens of snakes. Hey, never seen anything like it. Don't understand what was going on at all. Maybe it was a mating thing. I don't know water moccasins well enough, but it just seemed very bizarre. I've never seen anything like it. Them like out of the water like that, and just using their tails and just moving back and forth down the stream. I couldn't seem to get like what the purpose was, but they were doing this, and it was, again, like seeing the snakes doing that caduceus thing it was just weird. Didn't understand it, and Monica and I ended up getting out of there. And that was the last trip that I really had with her. I think we broke up after that. Just the distance thing is too, when you're that young and stuff, the military is terrible for relationships, So anyway, I'm in Louisiana. There's water moccasins, there's alligators all over the forest and stuff. There's those anole lizards like I used to have when I was a kid, and in our barracks, which were like little brownstone apartments, we had a lot of cockroaches. So I started, whenever we'd be sent to the field, I would empty one of my canteens, and I would catch lizards, those anoles, and pop them into my canteen. I get 2 or 3 of those where we're out doing some exercise or something, come back to the base, and I just let them run free in my room to eat cockroaches and such. Also, my roommate George from New York, he and I decided at one point to buy some iguanas, because we were allowed to have like fish or reptiles and something that you can have in a tank. We could have those in our barracks. So we both went out and bought iguanas, and it was my first experience raising an iguana. My iguana was called Mojo, and he lived with me in the barracks there for the duration of my stay in Louisiana, and then moved with me up to Boston when I got out. I had started a kind of a pen pal relationship with another one of my Army buddies, friends from back home, and he grew up in Maine, and this girl was moving to Boston to go to Simmons College. It's an all-women's college for as a communication major, and by the time that was going on, I was in that frame of mind, like I had my big identity crisis in the military that I'll talk about when something of that theme comes up. But the 2 things I wanted most in the world at that point, after getting to get out of the military, of course, would have been the number one, but the 2 after that is I wanted to find out what being Blackfoot is about, and I wanted to make sure that I got a post-secondary education because I never wanted unintelligent people to have such authority over me as they did in the military. And I figured education was my best route out of that kind of disrespect and subservience. So I had this girl from Maine who was going to move to Boston. I had her help me prepare my applications, and I applied to the University of Massachusetts, Boston Harbor, got accepted. And when I got out of the military, my buddy Pete from New York and my buddy James from New Hampshire, we all got out at the same time, and James owned a Volkswagen bus, and so we hopped in his Volkswagen bus and drove from Louisiana over to Florida and then up the coastline. And they dropped me off in Boston, and I moved in with this girl. I brought Mojo, my iguana, and he wasn't there long, maybe a couple of weeks, and Mojo escaped. I found him frozen to death outside my window. So that was the end of Mojo. But I was on to iguanas by that point, and I went and I bought 2 more iguanas to live in my apartment in Boston. And one of those iguanas grew larger than the other, and it used to kind of like bully the other iguana, hey? And it got to be where there's a significant size difference. And sometimes when I put food and stuff in there, the big one, if the little one's trying to eat, the big one would come and chase it away. The little one was getting malnourished and stuff, I think, too, and getting kind of soft. And then one night, I had this dream. It was a really vivid dream. And in the dream, that little lizard was hanging upside down from one of the sticks in the enclosure that I made for them. And the way it was hanging by its toenail had got caught in a groove of the stick, and it tried to jump off the stick, but its toenail was caught, so it had its one toe curled backward up over this stick, and his toenail caught there, and is hanging by one toenail basically, and one toe. And in my dream, that iguana talked to me like very clearly in my mind, and told me, you need to wake up and come help me or I'm gonna die. And it woke me up, and I got out of bed and went in the other room. And sure enough, that is exactly what was happening. Exactly what was happening. And so I released that lizard, and then I started taking better care of that lizard, like trying to separate it a bit from the mean one and that kind of thing. Ultimately, I left Boston kind of abruptly to come into the Blackfoot world. I met Mahoney. I was doing repatriation work, and before I get to that, I should talk about the rattlesnakes of the Blue Hills, because Boston, strangely enough, has this little pocket of rattlesnakes just outside the city in this area called the Blue Hills. It's a very, big nature area. And once I learned that, I started going to the Blue Hills on weekends, and I would camp. I would just bring my sleeping bag and stuff, and I'd sleep out there, and I was trying to encounter their rattlesnakes, and I never did find any. But I know they're up there because Steve Irwin did a show and he went up there and he found them. So I didn't find, he probably, I'm no doubt he had a local biologist lead him right to a den site, but I didn't have any luck. But yeah, I was in Boston for 4 years, and the only reptile stuff I had going on was my pet iguanas and those Blue Hill rattlesnakes that I never found. And then I met Mahoney. I had been doing repatriation work. I had been traveling with a group of elders from here, visiting major museums in the United States, the Smithsonian, Harvard's Peabody Museum, American Museum of Natural History on the Central Park West, the Hague, I think they call it the Hague. What is it? It's now the collections that I'm talking about. They were in New York on Battery Park, but then they shipped them to Washington D.C. to become the Smithsonian's Museum of the American Indian. But that was later. Right in those years. It must have been 1995, 96. Yeah, that museum wasn't established yet. But yeah, Chicago's Field Museum. I was going to all these big collection institutions and helping negotiate to bring bundles back home and back into ceremony. And I was working with these elders, and they would invite me. You know, since I was doing that work, they were telling me, well, you should be coming to our ceremonies so you can learn more about these things. And so I started coming up to participate in ceremony. And when I did, I would camp at one of the elders' houses. Initially, it was the late Alan Pard who would become my elder for the beaver bundle. But then I had a lot of work that I was trying to do at the band office in Standoff, transferring information I had. I had done this big study myself where I mailed requests to more than 4,000 museums worldwide asking for their Blackfoot inventories. And I rented a post office, and I had been getting, hundreds of these requests answered. And so I had all of these museum inventories. And while I was here, I would always go to Standoff and work in their culture office and try to upload or try to put into a database system all of the information that I had from those inventories. So my elder Alan Pard out in Brockett was a ways off from Standoff, but another one of the elders that I worked with, Martin Heavyhead, lived very close to Standoff, and he invited me to, he said he's putting up a teepee at his place, I could come stay there. So I started going to stay at Martin's. I think that year I came to a beaver bundle opening, 2 medicine pipe openings, the Sundance, and then later on that winter I did a all-night smoke. And each of those visits I would stay a week or two, and I was noticing Martin's daughter, but I thought she was underage, and so I stayed back. But I think in my last trip up during the all-night smoke in the winter, I learned that she was 19, I don't know who told me, maybe her mom or something, but I learned that she was 19, and then it was game on. I think Martin had been trying to push us together anyway, because he would always have me take her places and drive her places and stuff. He'd give me his truck, one of his trucks to use, but part of that deal was I had to be Mahoney's chauffeur, taking her to school, and even after, like, you know, we're sitting around in the evening, sometimes he'd tell me, why don't you guys go to a movie or, you know, go do something. So he was putting us together a lot, and it worked. And then I abruptly left Boston, and I left my iguanas, and my girlfriend from Boston had to take care of getting rid of them and all of my stuff. She mostly threw it into a storage unit, and I did take one trip out there. I drove from New York, where I was working some repatriations, and went to the storage unit, got some of my stuff out, and just ditched the rest. And I probably lost 80% of my worldly possessions at that point with that breakup. But then I moved here and started into my second life, and pretty much right away when we got into Lethbridge here, I got myself oriented to all of the snakes in the coulee, including I started learning where rattlesnake dens were and stuff like that. And I was pretty hardcore naturalist by that time. I mean, I'd been kind of a naturalist from the time I was 12, but, you know, by the time I was in my mid-20s, it was becoming a formidable my nature knowledge. And so I was paying a lot of attention to everything going on out here in the coulees, and certainly all the reptiles and stuff. And Canadian Geographic did an article with this guy. Shoot, I gotta remember his name. That's just retarded that I can't remember his name. But anyway, he's a biologist, and he was the one that started the rattlesnake program. He was very interested in the conservation of the species, and yeah, he's the one that started the whole rattlesnake program. And so he was doing some research relocating rattlesnakes and locking them into a compound for a year to get them kind of anchored in that site. And then he would test to see if, when he lets them out the next year, whether they start returning to that den regularly, and a lot of them did. So it's one way to work around the high mortality rate of rattlesnakes if you just move them willy-nilly to some other place. You can, but you need to lock them in a compound for a year, a whole season, so that they really get kind of stuck that place in their system. You know, that becomes home. So, any case, I decide I'm going to try to reach out to this guy and see if maybe I can work with the rattlesnakes and some of his research and stuff. So I gave him a phone call. I used to see him once in a while in the coulees, but I gave him a phone call, and I told him I'm interested in volunteering to work on some of his research projects. And he didn't really have anything going on right then. His research had kind of wrapped up, but he said, hey, why don't you come up? I'm doing this wildflower walk, guided wildflower walk up in the mountains. Why don't you come with me, and we'll talk and stuff. I'll get to know you a little bit. Maybe we'll figure out something, you know? So that day came. I told him I was going to go on that flower hike, and then I never did. Hey, the day came, and I can't remember exactly why I backed out, but I backed out. And then after that, I didn't hear from him again. I would see him now and then in the coulees, and I compare notes with him and stuff, tell him what I'm seeing with the snakes. But he never talked to me again about working with the program or going to do anything with him or nothing. I figured I'd burnt my chance by missing that flower walk, and I guess I wasn't serious enough for him or something, you know. But then, like 2 years after that flower walk, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I get a call from him, and oh, it's Reg. That was his Reg Ernst. Knew his name would come. So 2 years later, Reg calls me out of the blue, and his wife's brother has become terminally ill, and his wife's family all lives up by Edmonton. Neither of them really have any family down here in Lethbridge. I guess Reg had some, but they were moved away or something by that point. So didn't make sense for them to be there if his wife wanted to be around her family while her brother's dying and stuff. So they decided abruptly to move up by Edmonton, and Reg needed somebody to take over the rattlesnake program, and he asked me if I'd do it. And of course I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. So I trained with him for about 8 weeks or something, and he introduced me to everybody that I need to know with the city, and he transferred me the reins, gave me the rattlesnake program. That must have been 13 or 14 years ago, and you know, the story's been documented on my YouTube channel ever since. You guys know the rest of the story. So yeah, pretty much from my very earliest of childhood memories on, I've had reptiles in my life. I've had dogs in my life too, from early age on. Reptiles is just, to me, like another kind of animal that I've always been around, you know. And so working with these snakes is like second nature to me, really. I don't have any kind of, you know, I remember when I first started handling rattlesnakes, your heart is like going a million miles a minute and stuff, and it's a scary experience. But it's become just second nature to me now. And who knows, you know, what'll come in the future as far as my reptile work goes. But yeah, that's where it is. That's my Ryan and the Reptiles memoir. I can't believe my camera's battery lasted this long. That's pretty good. So there we are. Another memoir recorded, and probably get back to snakes for a few days, and then we'll see what I get to in the future here for continue this series. Yeah, I got to do some work today, mow a lawn, and then I really need to take a walk to prep for this weekend. I have another eco tour coming up. It's a wildflower tour in Cottonwood Park. So if you're interested in that and you're in Lethbridge, you can sign up for that at the Nature Center. And that'll be this Sunday at 1 o'clock at Cottonwood. All right. Till next time. Get a matsunoh boa.